everybody, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are, as always, very welcome to today's conversation. We are two social scientists, if we haven't met before, hello. Hi. And we hold PhDs in talking about humans, honestly, and how they get along with each other and how they form groups and how they see themselves, essentially culture. Mm-hmm. And we believe firmly that if we learn about other cultures and other people's human experiences, our human experience will only get richer, better, and fuller. So that's our life goal, is to help everybody human just a little bit richer. That's it. In service of that, we have conversations on this channel all the time about everything from, let's see, what did we talk about recently? Mediocre documentaries about places around the world to what we need to talk about with mental health and Olympic athletes to I get to do an interview series with folks who study things like energy transference between humans. It's wild. Lots and lots of wide-ranging conversations around here in order to help all of us understand each other a little bit better. We have conversations with each other about this stuff all the time. We turn on the recording devices so that we can hear from you. So please do all the YouTube-y things, like, subscribe, comment, and tell us your thoughts and feelings on our thoughts and feelings.
I just realized whenever I do this, like click, like this is my signal for you guys who don't know of like, you know, hit the bell. But I have no idea if I'm actually pointing at the bell or if it's that side. I'll have to watch one of these times and be like, but I think of it every time. I'm like, I go like this. I'm like, hit the bell. I don't know where the bell is. Lol. Yes, so this video is part of our ongoing look at the impact of colonization on these peoples and groups and cultures that we love to learn about. It is our lens through which we are traveling around the world and asking the question, what happened with colonization and why, and how has it influenced the culture and society that exists in these places? We are in a new chapter this month, y'all. We're in a new colonizer.
Welcome to August.
It's the month of August. We're up to French colonies. And boy, did we start out with a doozy, much like when we started out Portuguese last month with Brazil. I think we've picked one of the most interesting and complicated colonies of the French Empire. We are talking about Haiti. And this is our 101 video. Gird your loins. This is the most fascinating and complicated history on a tiny, tiny piece of land I've ever encountered.
And we say that as scholars of Northern Ireland.
Exactly. I have a whole bookshelf behind me on Northern Ireland, and like Haiti just blew it all out of the water. So before we get into the 101s of it all, we always say what we knew about Haiti before we started our research. For myself, I knew that it was in the Caribbean. I knew that they speak French there and that they shared the island of Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic. Boy, is that interesting and contentious. I knew zero things about them culturally, but I vaguely remember that I learned about Papa Doc Duvalier, but I had no idea why, aside from dictatorship. But like when I was scrolling, I was like, yeah, I remember that dude. No idea why. So again, not a lot of knowledge. Dr. Kristen, as per usual with this relationship, I know you knew more than me. What did you know?
We just have different, if we were doing a tour of like Italian Renaissance paintings, like you would know, like this was.
I'll just wait till we get to Italian colonies.
Oh, Italian colonies. I'm just going to sit there and be like, okay, explain things to me. I've been to Ethiopia. That'll be my only like help in that colonial relationship.
Yeah.
But so I became very into a nonprofit called Partners in Health when I was in college. When I was in grad school at Baylor. I was actually in Rwanda, and we were kind of, I can't remember, I think it was the year before. Yeah, it was the year before, and I was in Rwanda, and I read a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains, which is written by journalist Tracy Farmer as about Dr. Paul Farmer. No, Tracy something or another, and about Dr. Paul Farmer. Paul Farmer started Partners in Health when he was at Harvard Medical School, and on weekends flew himself down to Haiti to start essentially his deep belief, and the belief of Partners in Health is that where you are born should not determine the quality of medical care that you get. They go to places without roads. is kind of one of the ways that one of the staff members in Rwanda told it to me. We go places without roads and we bring Johnson & Johnson medicine, and care and training and clinics and everything else. And so their first place was in Haiti, was in the Central Plateau of Haiti. And a lot of the book of Mountains Beyond Mountains is the process of building community buy-in. And what did his hikes have to look like? He's a white dude from Massachusetts. Like, what did he have to do to kind of get buy-in? And they're very big on Indigenous leadership in PIH. If you have extra cash and you would like to help international fights of COVID, PIH is a really great place to throw your money. So I knew, like, tangentially that, and because that obsession started before the 2010 earthquake, I paid pretty close attention to the 2010 earthquake, and I watched a lot of the coverage. I remember that the now very famous video of Anderson Cooper pulling somebody from rubble and then crying. I remember a lot about that, and like tried to learn. I'm also an Oxfam supporter and Doctors Without Borders, and they send a lot of missives. And so I learned a lot by being a supporter of a nonprofit that was of multiple nonprofits that were in Haiti, kind of what that looked like. So yeah, I knew Creole. I've heard Creole spoken in like watching some other stuff, and I knew that they were a French colony, obviously. And I knew that the relationship with the DR wasn't great, but Lord above, did I have no idea.
Y'all.
I mean, I just had no idea. And I knew that the relationship between voodoo and Christianity was complicated. And there's a lot of syncretization on both sides, a lot of Christianity creeping into voodoo and a lot of voodoo creeping into Christianity. But there was like, I read a couple paragraphs today, and I already told Dr. Aaron, I said, okay, so next year I want an entire week where we're talking about voodoo, because I have so many questions. And the relationship between race and colonization and voodoo, honestly, we're going to spend a week next year talking about it. So I knew bits and pieces. But even with that, I would say for an American with no relationship to Haiti, I probably knew more than that. I probably knew a good amount. Oh, yeah. And it was still a finger tap of the surface of this place. And so I'm really, really excited. This, just like our Brazil video, if you joined us for that, where we said we're not even scratching the surface, we're standing on the shore, holding hands, looking at the ocean. That's how we feel about Haiti.
Yeah.
We commit to you guys that we're going to spend the next year, these countries that we're saying we're doing a whole month on next year, we're going to be learning. We're going to give ourselves the luxury of more time as well. It's a little bit behind the scenes baseball. We don't have a ton of time. It's usually a couple days to spend with these countries. And so a couple of them now, we're going to spend some months. Mm-hmm. And Haiti is one of them. So if you are joining us from Haiti, if you are a Haitian American or a Haitian expat somewhere else and would like to help us with our education, first of all, please know up front, we always love that. Yes. Everything we're about to say, we have found from multiple internet sources. We try to make them as reputable as possible. But we are learners. You are learners. We're here. Going to try to figure it out. So with all of those disclaimers, let's go to the map. Haiti, as Dr. Aaron said, is in the Caribbean. It shares the island of Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic. Whenever I say Dominican Republic now, I would like to start singing In the Heights, but I will refrain. It has about 11 million people. Knowing the little bit about Haiti that I know, I'm wondering how accurate some of those numbers are, because finding population is going to be really rough in some places, but 11 million sounds like the average that we see. Their capital is Port-au-Prince, and it is not a functional city even now after the earthquake. It's very, very difficult to get around, and there is no infrastructure largely that at least benefits more than a small minority of people in Port-au-Prince. So languages, the official are French and Creole. Creole is beautiful, by the way. If you've never heard Creole spoken, do a quick Google and just listen. Now, French Creole and Louisiana Creole are different Creoles. So if you're like, but I've been to New Orleans, I know Creole. No, the Haitian stuff is more French, and the Louisiana has a little bit more English in it. So please find Haitian Creole. It's absolutely stunning. In terms of ethnic and indigenous, it's 95% Black folk, mixed and white, and they use a lot of words for mixed race people. They're about 5%. It's incredibly Afrocentric. And when we talk about the relationship with the Dominican Republic, this is one of the disparences, one of the points of cultural demarcation is the race of the indigenous people of the sides of the island and the country now. The currency is a gourd, which I think I'm saying correctly, but probably isn't. And at this moment right now, it is 94 of them to $1. So not a super strong economy. The system of government is a semi-presidential republic with 10 departments. It's very largely influenced by the Napoleonic Code because it tried and did the very first time become an independent nation while Napoleon was still kind of Napoleoning all over the place. Now, religion is interesting. Statistics will tell you that it's only about 55% Catholic, but when I read reports on the ground, the Catholic Church's influence culturally is much larger than those of practicing Protestants. So there may be, 28% of people who say they're Methodist, Anglican, evangelical, what have you, but the cultural impact, which is the same in a lot of French colonies. For anyone who didn't know, the French National Church was the Catholic Church for a lot of centuries, is very, very strong. The Roman Catholic presence in the culture is incredibly strong. Voodoo is an official religion as of 2003. But like we said, the synchronicity between the two, for anyone who hasn't joined us before, synchronicity is when religions go into places and look specifically like those places by picking up other things. So the Latin American version of Catholicism is going to be different in Belize, Brazil, kind of all over the place because of syncretism and synchronicity. Religion scholar update. So it sounds like also it is known as a deeply conservative country. We'll get to this in a minute when we get to LGBT rights. It is kind of known as a deeply religious country, whatever that religion looks like, a deeply spiritual place, a deeply, people will say superstitious, and very often little code word for you. If a white person is saying a group of non-white people is superstitious, it's normally a way to say that. It's normally an act of racism to say that, just as a heads up. So that's what you get a lot in writings about Haiti.
Unless you're talking about professional hockey players, and then you're just noting that they're very superstitious. But when it's used in other cultural contexts.
Yes. Group of white people talking about Africans, Asians, Hispanic folks, Latin folks, it's probably going to be hella racist. Because baseball players are really superstitious too. Haiti is a free market economy. It's rough to be a free market economy with limited natural resources and or no power to bully other places to give you their natural resources. And Haiti's a great example of that. They were really overcropped when the French ran them. The French really destroyed the soil trying to grow too much sugarcane. And so they don't have a lot of natural resources. Additionally, because the soil is so shit, natural disasters hit them a lot in some specific ways. Now, an earthquake, it doesn't matter what the soil really is. Like, the earthquake was terrible. It was a 7.1 on the Richter scale. Like, good Lord, you can't survive that. Like, you can't. But there's not another way to kind of aggro jumpstart your economy because of the decimation of the soil. Poverty is massive. Over 60% of Haiti's folks live on less than $2 a day, which, by the way, is the global rate of poverty. So the global rate of poverty is living on less than $2 a day. This is one of the reasons that we here at the Good Doctors will often say, if you live in the United States, even backbreaking poverty in the United States is not global poverty. And that's why there are not many people that live in the United States on less than $2 a day. You would be part of the homeless population. So there are some, but it is not at the rate that it is in a lot of other international locations, specifically Haiti. Haiti is definitely one of the largest proportions of people in systemic, generational, backbreaking poverty. There's low education. I mean, you want to tick all the boxes, guys, here. It's not good. Like, the infrastructure is not good. And it's hard for people to be anything different than what they were born in, than the circumstances they were born into when the infrastructure is bad. And it's just really, there's only about 61% literacy rate. Literacy, I've read a couple different statistics on different sites. People judge literacy at different times. Is this people can read their name? Is this people can read a book? What is literacy here? But everyone agrees that Haiti is very low. Two more things really quick, and then I'm going to unleash Dr. Erin on you to teach you about the history of colonization, because, has she learned some things. The demographics, Haiti is really young. This is common in places that are ravaged by AIDS and poverty. And Haiti is absolutely no exception to that. The other kind of piece that's a very specifically delightful 21st century piece is that it's a real big location of forced labor and sex trafficking. Because it's so close to the United States, it's easy for boats to pull up and say, hey, come and get a new life. Haitians are, I've read places where they say that in terms of an ethnic and country group, they're the largest proportion of people who are trafficked in the Western Hemisphere. I've seen some other claims in some other places, but that's at least colloquially known. It's bad. It's bad. So in terms of our queer friends, it's so bad for women. I'm not even getting into it, by the way. So it's just bad. Our queer friends, homosexuality is legal, but same-sex marriage is not. There are absolutely no protections for trans or sexual queer lives in any way, shape, or form. There's no hate crimes protections. There's no anything. A lot of places blame this on the high religiosity, and that it very much may be true. Overall, again, it appears to be a conservative country in general. And I found a couple interesting, about how voodoo views homosexuality that I cannot confirm. Like, I don't have enough sources to speak to you about it, but there was enough to make my brain go, So we're going to keep chasing that because that looks really fascinating. Now, how we got to all of these places is the French. So, Dr. Erin, teach us about Haiti and colonization.
Yeah, I mean, so often when we tell the stories of these cultures, we can make a lot of direct connections to how they were colonized, how long they were colonized, what the impact of that was. But once I tell you this story, everything Dr. Kristen just told you is going to make a whole heck of a lot of sense. If I believed in luck, which I sort of do, but if I really believed in it, I would believe that Haiti is the unluckiest plot of land ever to have the audacity to declare itself independent. It's a roller coaster. It's time for story time with Dr. Erin, and this is a long story, so bear with me, but it's so interesting. I just couldn't. I might try and cut some things out, but I might not because it's so interesting, and I think you guys will think it is too. So we are back again in the land. If you remember when we covered Puerto Rico, the native Taino peoples who inhabited the island of Hispaniola. When Christopher Columbus was there, that's where we get the name Haiti originally. Columbus first landed in 1492 and wiped out a lot of people when they settled the land within 25 years. So it was first colonized by the Spanish up until 1625. Lots of things happened. Mostly the Spanish were more interested in colonizing parts of Central and South America. There was more value for them there. So they were kind of leaving the island alone. There was a little war with the French, and eventually the Spanish were like, you know what, you can have this part of the island. It's cool. The French had established spots on the island through like marauding and pirating buccaneers in the early 17th century, which is, cool.
Sure.
So by 1697, after the 17th century happened, Spain ceded the part of the island to the French. And in the Treaty of Ryswick, which I just thought was a cool name, I have no idea the etymology of that name. But the French colony was based on forestry and sugar-related industries and quickly became one of the wealthiest colonies in the Caribbean. But it relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved Africans. And the French, as Dr. Kristen said, weren't real good at planting crops. They didn't cycle through different crops on different parts of land. And so they overused the land very quickly and significantly degraded the environment.
And they were also big into forestry. It wasn't just sugarcane. They also cut down all the forests.
Well, they cut down a lot of the forests, and then the Haitians cut down all of the rest of the forest to pay off their debt. More on that.
Yeah.
In a minute. At one point, Haiti produced 40% of Europe's sugar and 60% of their coffee. If you remember from our time with Portuguese colonies and the immense number of enslaved Africans that were forcibly sent to Brazil, Haiti, which is very, very tiny, had the second highest population of enslaved Africans below Brazil.
Okay, so this is another thing they don't teach us in school. I was definitely taught America was the worst.
You know,
like we had the most. We had the third, and maybe not even the third highest. Like we are like super down the list.
We're not super down the list, but like we're Haiti sneaks in there, man. So the
Haiti's
French,
like smaller than New Jersey.
It's very small. It's very small. The French enacted the Code Noir, the Black Code, which established rules of slave treatment and permissible freedoms on the colony that they called Saint-Domingue, which was like the same name as Santo Domenico, which is the Dominican Republic. They just called it the same name in different languages.
This happens on St. Martin as well, by the way. There's a Dutch bit and a French bit, and there's just an extra E on the Dutch bit. It's very confusing when you're booking tourism. Okay.
Yeah. Saint-Domingue has the unique history of being described as one of the most brutally efficient slave colonies. 1/3 of newly imported Africans died within a few years.
Cool.
Many enslaved people died from diseases such as smallpox, typhoid fever, very common. The colony's environment also suffered. Forests were cleared to make way for the sugar plantations. Obviously, when you're producing that much coffee and sugar for Europe, those white people get thirsty. And so they just cleared a lot of the forests. And so the land was overworked to just take as much profit as possible. That's what colonization is. As in its Louisiana colony, which existed still at the time, the French colonial government, there's like an interesting history of like free people of color, mixed race descendants of male European colonists, and you know, relationships with enslaved African women, which we can talk about relationships and consent when you're an enslaved African woman, but
Sally Hemings.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce you to my friend Sally Hemings. Many were released from slavery, though, and they established a separate social class that was like in between white colonists and like enslaved people. Very interesting. We get like white French Creole fathers who sent their mixed race sons to France for their education. So then you get those men come back and join the military. It's all building towards something. What is it building toward, Dr. Aaron? Glad you asked. In the midst of the French Revolution, some of the Haitians were like, you know what sounds like a good idea?
Independence.
Revolutions. So it's a good time always when your colonizer is embroiled in another conflict. Just ask Ireland in the First World War to also have a revolution. So the Haitian Revolution began in 1791. They were led by Toussaint Louverture, who was a former slave and the first Black general in the French army. After 12 years of conflict, Haiti became the only country in the world led by formerly enslaved people. They became first in a long line of firsts, the first independent nation of Latin America, and the second independent nation in South America, the first in the Caribbean, the first country to abolish slavery, which they did immediately in 1804. It didn't go well for them. But because they were the first independent nation run by formerly enslaved people, nobody wanted to do business with them because the rest of the world still thought slavery was cool. So they faced embargoes. The US was like, we don't want our enslaved people getting any crazy ideas, so we're going to ignore you. So they were completely isolated internationally because racists being racists. And then the French sent them a little note that said, we would like 15 million francs, please, in 30 years, because when you declared independence, you stole all our assets. And so thus we get to the second element of deforestation in Haiti, because they cut down all their trees to pay off their debts. So their first century of independence was marked by loads of political instability, ostracization from the international community, and the payment of crippling debts. So, you know, when you start off on that kind of foot, like, where do you go, folks? You can't trade. No one will trade with you. And all of your labor is going to paying off a debt. We got some American occupation of Haiti for 20 years, which I definitely didn't learn about growing up.
Of course we did.
We're into the 20th century now. Germany started to increase its influence in Haiti and its economy, which made us in the US of A very nervous.
Yeah.
We were scared of an anti-American government in 1915. So we did what we always do. We sent a bunch of troops. Thanks, President Wilson, for being horrible.
Oh my gosh, he was just so good at international diplomacy. I'm so glad that that's what he's known for.
He was the best. We declared martial law and censored the troops. We installed a pro-United States president, complete with a shiny new constitution that was written to be favorable to the United States. It was written by...
God, America makes me tired.
So tired.
Oh!
So tired. The Constitution was written by a future influential white dude, U.S. President FDR. And
are you serious?
Yeah, dude, FDR wrote
their constitution?
Wrote their new constitution.
I'm actually so glad I didn't read this document ahead of time. Normally I do, but like this is so much more angering and fun. FDR, what are you doing?
My history of colonization on this document is so long, I don't blame Dr. Kristen for not reading it. Yeah, I haven't even gotten to the worst bit of this. So FDR wrote the Constitution, and he wrote this clause that allowed, for the first time, foreign ownership of land in Haiti.
No, of course he did. Of course he did. I'm not surprised, but
which they didn't want, and we didn't ask them.
No. Because consent has never been part of Haiti's life. Why would we pretend it is now?
Why would we pretend anything different? So eventually, after 29 years, am I doing my math right? 19 years. 19 years, we negotiated a secure end to the occupation, but not before they owed us more money. Yeah. After the U.S. occupation, we had a series of, dictators in Haiti, because what is left in a massive void of political stability, but room for dictators? Francois Papa Doc Duvalier and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, who led repressive and corrupt regimes from 1957 to 1986. They traded off in 1971. So all of that happened, y'all. And then they got hit by this earthquake in 2010. And so they don't have infrastructure. The land is overused and unstable. And then they haven't had any money. So they've built inadequate housing. So what happens? It all crumbles and people die. 200 to 300,000 people estimated killed. And obviously an estimate, because I'm sure they didn't find a lot of bodies, displaced 1.6 million people. Then
6 years later.
Then they got hit by Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And so, I mean, it's a horribly, horribly tragic story.
And then as we should say too, as we talk right now, we're talking in July of 2021, there's another round of instability. The Haitian president was recently assassinated. Just now, the guy who was taking over for him has stepped down. There's a lot of consternation both inside of Haiti and outside of Haiti as to how this is going to affect Haitian people.
Yeah, there was a period of protests ongoing starting from 2018 and the changing of fuel prices, the removal of fuel subsidies for folks, but eventually evolved into increasing demands for President Moise to resign. The former president, was accused of unduly extending his mandate and promoting an unconstitutional revolution, and
he suspended parliament for
like 2 years.
2 years, which honestly only Stormont gets to do in Northern Ireland. So
oh, I know. So a Human Rights Watch report says that Haiti is facing one of the worst outbreaks of violence since 1986 and was failing to meet the basic needs of its people, resolve longstanding human rights problems, and address humanitarian crises. And that report obviously came out before the assassination of the president, which was on the 7th of July, 2021. So I mean, they've been set up to fail since the beginning. Like how because they had the audacity to say, we don't want to be enslaved anymore. We'd like to have our own agency and decide our own future. And ever since then, it has just been a series of, like, they've just got shat on by everyone. Including really a lot by the United States. So yeah, I haven't been this angry about a colonization. I don't know, in a month probably. I was pretty angry about some other.
I was about to say, if you say a long time, I'm going to refer you to about 3 weeks ago when we talked about Brazil, but that's okay.
I was about to say, I haven't been this angry since week 1 of Portuguese colonies.
Since Brazil. I think it's really, it's fascinating how quickly places like this fall off people's radar too.
Yeah.
Like I remember there was so much outreach for Haiti right after the hurricane, and then right after, and you know, I mean, it's just like the beautiful line, the Nick Nolte line from Hotel Rwanda, where he says, "People will see, they will be terribly upset for you, and then they will go back to eating their dinners."
Yeah, and like I'm guilty of that as well. Like I remember. The earthquake, and I remember going to like fundraisers where
I ran a couple. Yeah.
And then it falls off.
Life happened.
Like, you know, so we're guilty of that, yes. But also I think like was a pretty a lot of horrible things have happened between 2010 and now as well. So like then the focus shifts to move Northern Ireland in periods of protest, and then we've got Syrian refugees and the bombing of Aleppo, and like I just, you know, we get pulled in so many different international crises directions. But
yeah, this one just, for me, this hits differently because it's on our doorstep.
It's right there, and like we're always involved in everything, so like I can't say, you know, like wow, we were more involved in Haiti, but I think we were more involved in Haiti than some of these other international.
If we wrote the Constitution, we can say we were involved in Haiti. And I've definitely heard from Haitian scholars, both Indigenous to Haiti and Americans who study Haiti, that we installed Papa Doc. So, like just flat out.
Probably true. Yeah, so, I mean, like this is one of the reasons why we're going to take a whole month in Haiti next year, because we want to do longer, more in-depth research. And there's so much to talk about and so much to highlight. Because one of the things that I watched a short video on it. One of the things I'd love to talk about is the double-edged sword of being in constant crisis and having so many, and like having a industry of NGOs.
Yeah.
And then like in some way, like the NGOs are helping people, like giving people food and healthcare. They're doing amazing things, but it's real hard to build infrastructure
when you're relying on NGOs. Yeah.
When you're relying on NGOs, and they become an industry in and of themselves. And so, man, is it super, super complicated. So this is definitely scratching the surface. Put a pin in Haiti. And we're gonna come back to it in 2022, where I'm sure we'll have more things to yell about. But Dr. Kristen, what was your takeaway from Haiti? What was the thing you wanted to talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about a whole heck of a lot, but I'd like to now reiterate that Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote their Constitution. I'm going to be
sitting.
We don't that okay. Okay. I mean, I have a deep and abiding respect for anybody who does their best to survive in these kind of circumstances. Humans are incredible, and continue to be incredible despite things being thrown at them. So this was a good reminder of that. I loved the little bit that I learned, just that there was a real difference of opinion within Voodoo regarding homosexuality and multiple and bisexuality and gender and kind of all that. And I'm very interested to learn more regarding that particular thing. But my brain has been wiped by this whole we wrote their constitution thing. So I need to sit on that for a little bit longer. Yourself?
That's just fair. Yeah, in the living Google Doc that is forever linked to this video, watched a really interesting New York Times piece on the rise of voodoo in Haitian American communities and like in Brooklyn.
Ooh, yeah, that makes sense.
Which is cool. But that's not what I want to talk about. Two things. One quick. Wyclef Jean, who is Haitian,
yes,
ran for president of Haiti, was disqualified because he hadn't lived there for 5 years.
Yeah, this is ringing bells. I feel like The Daily Show talked about this. Yes, yeah, okay.
I feel that interesting. But the thing I want to talk about is this sculpture gallery artist's living space called Atis Resistance. And they combine real human bones with metal.
Okay.
And it is a site of like art as resistance. They mix voodoo storytelling and political resistance. They have a lot of objects made out of trash.
Okay.
Like indicative of the high levels of poverty and like lack of infrastructure and all of this. And it's this massive like walking museum sculpture garden where they have skulls from people who died in the earthquake. We can talk about the ethics and morality of that. But there is a super long form article that I found that I haven't had time to read yet. But there's a link in the show notes in the Google Doc to the Atlas Obscura piece that just gives you a sense for it. But you know me and art as resistance. I was just like, this place looks so cool and it's in Port-au-Prince and I want to go. That's all.
Yeah, I've wanted to go to Haiti for a long time and do what I could. And then everybody I trust at NGOs is like, if you're not trained to be here, if you're not a medical person, don't come. Because that's
come. Yeah.
Other than that, you're taking up resources. I was like, okay. Yeah. So someday my prayer is that I can go because I won't be taking resources and I can learn and support the economy in Haiti. And in the meantime, we're going to be looking up Haitian American restaurants to be able to do what we can on that part as well. You guys know that we like to help the world through food. So we will be...
We're finding some fried plantains, y'all.
Oh, yeah. Immediately. We're going to be doing that and hanging out and learning a lot. The rest of this year, we will be marinating. We'll set up Google alerts for Haiti and Brazil. And then probably... We haven't even touched the British Empire on our schedule yet, by the way.
Like,
I have a feeling I'm just going to declare right now. So next year's big focus is India.
Or Belgium. Belgium was a real problem.
But Belgium was a real problem for, again, like Portuguese, a small number of people, like a small number of countries. But yeah, we could do a whole month next year on the DRC.
But we've got to do Leopold, man, because he was...
Guys, we have to talk about Kevin and Bridgerton and Leopold. If you guys do not know about Belgian King Leopold...
Because then we can talk about our time in the museum in Brussels where they were like, he was the best ever. And we were like, what?
And I was like, do we have acid we can throw at this?
Are we about to become those people that vandalize museums for upholding?
I think we are. Yeah, we almost did that in a museum in Amsterdam too, where they talked about William of Orange. But we are not the people you want in your museums if they are not inclusive. We will loudly be like, well, that's crap. So
I tell people all the time about that museum in Brussels.
We have a lot of feelings. But anyway, so just know that on our schedule, we're this head up and we haven't even touched the British Empire yet. So I could talk about Kenya for like an age. So away we go, folks. But as always, as we marinate in Haiti and these other countries and their story, if you've got resources for us whenever you watch this, even if you're watching it in 2027, we always want to continue to learn. Please teach us. Obviously, as we've said, we've never been there. And so we have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about two other Americans who had a lot to learn, did go to Haiti, and actually, spoiler alert, didn't learn a thing. And using this documentary as a lens through which to talk about how white saviors are not always white. and exactly what helping versus hurting looks like when we talk about story propagation, and why Dr. Aaron and I use the phrase poverty porn pretty often. So definitely join us for tomorrow's discussion of the documentary Le Quai.
We'll see you then, everybody.